Sometimes the best literature comes about because of tumultuous times and somebody rising to the top who will address those chaotic times to give an explanation for them and to give an idea of what ought to be done now. Certainly that's the case with Augustine in the City of God. He comes to the forefront in response to a letter from his friend Marcellinus, who needs to give an answer for the hope that he has with regard to how you explain the fall of the Roman Empire. Alaric, who was a fellow Christian, as it turns out, pillages Rome for 3 days. Now, when Rome falls, it is not completely destroyed, never to rise again. He's only there for 3 days, but he carries off a vast booty. He leaves behind him a mass of corpses and ruins, and probably the biggest thing that happened was the psychological devastation for all who have grown up trusting and following and loving Rome and feeling its stability and its sense of security. And so when all of that is ripped away, who's responsible? And a persistent rumor comes about that it is because Rome had left its pagan gods as they had become followers of Christ in more and more numbers. Rome had been weakened and had fallen, and the repair was to throw off Christianity again and return to the polytheism of the past in order to restore the strength of Rome. Here is sort of the argument, that Christian doctrine taught renunciation of the world, and because of that, they would bend people away from public service. And for a Roman citizen, public service was the most important thing, the lasting thing, the thing that gave life meaning and purpose, was the kind of service that you could provide for the state. And so to renounce that kind of service, or to renounce the world as they assumed Christians taught, meant that they weakened the character of the empire. The destiny of Rome was always bound up with the worship of her gods. They said when the Christian religion began to spread, pagans began to worry and proclaim that their betrayed gods would visit terrible punishments upon the empire, and now look what's happened. So, one public leader writes another public leader who is a believer and argues that we ought to abandon the pursuit of Christianity, and Marcellinus, who is a believer, is looking to answer his objections. And so he looks for a man who can help him, and there is none better than Augustine to step forward and to answer those objections. So here's what Volusianus has argued. The preaching and teaching of Christ is not compatible with the duties and the rights of citizens. You teach people to turn the other cheek, or to walk the extra mile, or not to repay injury with injury, makes your nation, at least militarily, weak. So it seems clear that you can't put those into practice without ruining the country that you're trying to serve. So Volusianus writes those in a letter, and Marcellinus writes and asks Augustine, how would you answer these arguments? Marcellinus actually adds one more argument, and this is sort of icing on the cake. It's even worse than that. It is manifest, Marcellinus said, that the very great calamities have befallen the country under the government of emperors practicing, for the most part, the Christian religion. Right? So you have Constantine, and then Constantine fights under the cross of Christ, and he dies getting baptized. And then Julian the Apostate arises and tries to restore the polytheism of the past. So Marcellinus is wondering now, why in the world is Rome collapsing under, when Christianity is just getting a foothold and the emperors are, for the most part, beginning to practice the Christian religion, why are we weaker now? So Augustine picks up his pen and he writes The City of God. Marcellinus will actually die before The City of God is finished, but all of us are in great debt to that small political situation which caused Augustine to write a book that's really timeless. Augustine says this in his Retractations, why he was inspired to write The City of God. When Rome was devastated as a result of the invasion of the Goths under the leadership of Alaric, the worshippers of the many false gods, whom we are accustomed to call pagan, began, in their attempt to blame this devastation on the Christian religion, to blaspheme the true God with more bitterness and sharpness than usual. Wherefore, fired with a zeal for God's house, I determined to write my book, The City of God, against their blasphemies and errors. So this was Augustine's motivation for taking pen in hand and to write The City of God. When he responds, he has a couple of different arguments that he uses. The first one he says is Rome didn't fall because of the Christians. Rome fell because of the vices within itself. And he actually quotes pagan philosophers who are in line with what Jesus taught, have taught the same thing. He says that's not the problem. The problem is the vices within the empire that brought it to ruin. He says as well that Christian Revelation teaches two distinct ends. We want to save human society, and in this means we walk in as salt and light. We rescue, we preserve human society. And then we desire to build a society that would move us toward more Christ-likeness. Now, if we have those two things, then we have a great base for getting the gospel out. So what could be feared in having a group of people within your empire who desire to save human society and to build a society that would move toward goodness and righteousness and justice? Augustine will even say, take to yourselves good Christians, and you will be given good citizens. The City of God breaks into two parts. The first part is the argument, the defense of Christianity against the claims that it makes the empire weak. So books 1-4, the first half, would largely cover that part. All right. Then the last half, 15 to 22, begins Augustine's description of the two cities, and he compares and contrasts them, and he builds a great theology of how a Christian is to live in society and where his allegiances should lie. So Augustine's second part is that development and purposes or the ends of these two cities, the city of man and the city of God. Augustine has another reason for doing this. Augustine wanted to admonish Christians who had begun to equate the existence of the Roman Empire with the purposes of God. If you had begun to think that and then Rome falls, it would begin to cause your faith to tremble because something wrong is going on and you were sure God was going this way with his full stamp of approval on Rome, and now Rome has fallen. You would transfer that psychological devastation that you had when that nation fell, you would transfer it over onto, so what in the world is God doing in the world today? So there are really two cities. I like the way Al Mohler describes them. The city of man was the kingdom that was going away. Christians have an investment in the earthly city, but it's not the summum bonum. It's not the greatest good. The greatest good is the city of God, and that kingdom is not going away. That kingdom is coming. Ultimately, we are aliens and pilgrims here, but what is coming, that's what we wait for with great anticipation. As we close this video out, I leave you with a couple of interesting discussion questions that apply to our day as well. Are Christians contributors or detractors to a successful government and society? And then another one is, do we identify Christianity too closely with our own government here in the United States of America?